already trickling into the session. Hello and welcome everyone to our CodeX group meeting. It's my pleasure to introduce our speaker today, Josh Walker. Josh is a man of the first hour with CodeX and many other projects that he launched. But with regard to CodeX, he was a co-founder of the center, the initial executive director of the center, and then he went on to start Lex Machina, the Intellectual Property Litigation Clearinghouse, later known as Lex Machina, which was the first spin-off of the law school. And yeah, many other things I could mention in terms of his accomplishments in the world of AI and law and legal tech. He's also an accomplished practitioner and traveling around the world and consulting governments around legal innovation and AI. And today he's here with us to talk about the Brazilian AI bill and his work in Brazil. And yeah, with that, I will turn it over to Josh. And folks, before I do that, if you have any updates to share with the group, please share them through the chat. If you have questions, just unmute yourself and ask questions or use the chat. And then the other final thing I wanted to mention is you may have seen our large language models and law hackathon, which is coming up in a couple of weeks, on May 20th. And if some of you are interested in participating, please check it out. And we're going to have a pretty full house, so you should apply sooner than later. So over to you, Josh. Welcome.
Thank you so much. It's like coming home. I was just talking to Megan. Thank you. What Roland didn't tell you is that he is a vastly superior executive director than I ever was. And hopefully my talents have been well used. He also didn't tell you that Lex Machina wouldn't have happened without him. So I wouldn't have been involved in that if not for him. So anyway, thank you, Roland, and thanks for the invite, and thanks for Megan for being a great leader as well. There's a couple of things I want to talk about. I'm here today to talk about governing AI, an issue that in some ways is irrelevant to Codex, and in some ways might be very relevant because of the way that I suggest we approach it, which is using, here's the punchline, legal AI to govern AI. There are a couple things I wanted to mention first. One is, would love your input on this. These issues we're going to be talking about today have no real answers. There's no demo, there's no deck, there's no definitive prescriptive solution to something that we've never encountered before, which is something like an alien intelligence that's about to visit us. If it's not here yet, but it might visit us in a bit. Second is, I need your help. From the beginning of Codex, we kind of had the sense that things like patent and big commercial things would get taken care of. There's a market for that. All of you are involved in one way or another in either innovations in the academy, from Iowa State to the West Coast, to the East Coast, to all over India, to Europe. But some of the things fall through the cracks, things like prisoners' rights, a lot of other issues. And when I started doing this kind of thing, it was in Bosnia and Rwanda, and we've never really had a chance to do things that are human rights related in Codex. It may be that there's just so much force and technology and development and now investment in this world that the pull of that and the mandate of that is pretty strong and limiting in some ways. I have recently been approached by folks who've had their cousins and family members and people they know attacked. There is mass murder right now all over the world, but obviously particularly in the Ukraine and other areas. And Stanford and its extended network is intensely related in the war crimes prosecution area, and hopefully starting a bit with the Human Rights Clinic at Stanford Law School, but in other groups as well. And we have an opportunity to help with kind of war crimes prosecution and evidence, data and information and the handling of that. I can't talk about it too much today because it's not my mandate and all the rest of it, but please find me on LinkedIn or just email j@system.legal. If you're interested in human rights, war crimes prosecution, we need your help. Whoever you are, you've got a special talent set and you're here, whether it's outside the university or inside of it. So thanks for that, and I can follow up on that in a bit. Thanks also for your questions. Second, we are publishing something called the Legal Technology Handbook this month. Colin Levy, that a lot of you, gentlemen, a lot of you know, lovely human being and brilliant guy, just put together a group of 10 or 15 people, and that's coming out. Would love your critique of the book and of the chapters. So again, that's you can find it on LinkedIn. The third thing I want to bring up is a big, deep think for the folks here, and that is a question. It relates to governing AI, but it's a little bit distinct, and it's actually quite theoretical as well as practical. And that is, should AI be interpretable? So right now, as a lot of you know, a lot of the deep learning models are black box. They have no idea. You can't figure out directly how they came to the conclusions they did. You can try to explain it ex post, but if it relies on a trillion variables, it's really hard to explain how it's making a decision or making a classification or predicting a letter or something like that. There is a lot of development. Duke Lab, the Duke University Computer Science Lab is working on interpretable AI with sort of neural network models and things like that as well. But I think one of the things we have to confront is, should AI, or at least legal AI, be interpretable? Should we force it to use methods where we can explain and show things? So I just wanted to throw that out there. It's a bit of a softball for the logic people that might be here, but it's important that we think about whether we need to prove AI conclusions or whether we just kind of have lots of black boxes and have them competing with each other. So that's that. Governing AI. So AI governance, in my view, involves three different kinds of monsters. Scylla, Charybdis, right? This goes back to Greek mythology, where Scylla is the monster with lots of fingers and things that comes out and attacks the sailors as they're trying to get through this narrow passageway and plucks them off and eats them. And it's terrible, D&D like, monster maw. Charybdis is a whirlpool. So if you go too far, steer too far away from Scylla, you end up in this whirlpool and get sucked down to the bottom of the ocean and are killed. And there's a theory that this is an actual place. There's a whirlpool back in the ancient world, and it's somewhere around modern day Turkey, and towards heading towards the Black Sea potentially. And it just sucked down sailors and killed them that way too. So you have to steer carefully between these two dangers. There is a third danger in addition to Scylla and Charybdis, and that's space tornado. So what I would suggest is that Scylla, in our case, is really over-regulation of AI. And again, I will get to the application of AI in law in a second. Just bear with me a little bit, but right now we're talking about almost legal compliance for AI. The regulatory risk that's like Scylla is over-regulation. And I have had a hypothesis about European, for instance, AI regulation, as well as PRC regulation, but that's a different tack. But if you look at the EC and what they're doing, a lot of, and in data regulation in the EC, my hypothesis has been it's done a lot of good for sure, but that it's also wiped out trillions of dollars of commerce, which if you add that up, ends up killing people, right? So you can say, we're gonna regulate things, we're gonna prevent harms, but net, you could end up doing more harm than good through the regulation itself. And I'm just saying, I'm not saying the EU is wrong, but what I've seen and what people much smarter who've been more heavily involved in the AI regulatory world in the EC have said is that it really it's wiped out the startup ecosystem because it's so expensive to comply with GDPR and all the other regulations and potentially the new AI regulations that are being contemplated and about to be promulgated in some form. That the only people that can comply with this are these American tech companies, right? And you can't target them too much either, because that's also prejudicial and unwise for lots of reasons. So that's the Scylla risk. is that, we have this thing and you wipe out the benefits of artificial intelligence technology. And you see this today. They're saying, well, we're focused on AI's harms. It can save a lot of lives. Like just with cancer detection, there's an enormous amount of stuff that can be done, obviously, with AI. So you really have to balance these equations when you're doing it. The Charybdis risk, the water vortex, is that it's an underregulation. It's the classic American risk where you've got this, you living the libertarian dream, and Enron and the mortgage crisis and credit default swaps are just like explode and destroy the planet, right? So when you have kids that get addicted to social media and terrible things happen, we're literally being sucked down to the lowest common denominator, right? And that ends up, being just as bad, really, as overregulation. So that's another side of the risk. The space tornado is different. So still in Charybdis, it's a political decision, essentially. It's like, how regulated do we want to be? How protective, or how do we view the free market as being a useful additive and regulation, self-regulation mechanism itself? Which doesn't always work with discontinuous risks like AI, but that's another matter. The space tornado says, okay, let's just assume we get regulation perfect, absolutely perfect. But the problem is the speed and scale of the innovation is so fast, and it's so immediate, right? And intelligence is compounding, as someone once said in a Peter Thiel class. And AI is more compounding than that. So when you do get a risk, right, an enormous problem, it explodes and can cause harm at a discontinuous rate. And so therefore, we can have the best regulation in the world, but it's too late, it's irrelevant. So again, you've got the risks are overregulation, underregulation, and it's irrelevant. So my focus is really on the space tornado risk. And the reason I say that, it's not a political risk, it's something that we can address. And if you haven't read the paper, I did a book called On Legal AI, which is a little bit of use cases of things that have happened to us in the past and in this area. But some of a recipe for developing AI that seems to be helpful. But the real thing that the people in this room, virtual room, can deal with is the space tornado risk. Because the only way that you can manage a massive kind of discontinuous risk, like a compounding AI phenomenon, is with AI itself. There is no way you can do it entirely with humans sitting in DC or Brussels or Beijing or wherever that are regulating this. You actually need AI to manage this. And I think some of the more thoughtful, like OpenAI and Anthropic, they're both doing quite interesting things with AI itself. They're all looking to use AI as a counterbalancing and red teaming mechanism. And I think that's really good. It's incomplete, but it's actually good that we see this kind of innovation and kind of self-regulation. It's totally insufficient and it fails, but it's still great that we're doing this stuff. The suggestion in the paper is that what we actually need is a three-tier system. It's essentially an auditing ecosystem. Number one is legal engineering systems that are within the commercial or civil entity itself. So they're trying to regulate themselves. There are existing laws that apply to them, whether it's the FTC or tort law or things like that. And they're trying to, and intellectual property law, which is an enormous matrix of stuff that's going to interact with AI in a big way, and has already. So when we're doing that, when we got that's great, but there's two problems with it. One, if you look at what people are doing now, and so constitutional AI with Anthropic is one thing that's really just come out. They're talking about how they're going to regulate themselves. It's all done by engineers, and it's great that they're doing this and thinking about ethical AI and all the rest of it. The problem is that it's a bit like lawyers building bridges. We may be able to figure stuff out. We got through a lot of schooling and got our marks, and we can figure things out, and we can build a table and all this stuff. But we don't have calculus, or we're not good at it. It's not our natural milieu. We don't have an empirical base to deal with it. And if I could give one call to action to the people in this group, it's that you need to be the legal engineer, right? An advisor of these things that goes in and develops not just some policy thing that checks stuff. There needs to be a legal subsystem that has, potentially an infinite amount of complexity to deal with an infinite amount of types of legal risk and harms to consumers and things like that. You need a subsystem. So there's flaws in the internal things that are happening too. The second thing we need, and that's in the paper, it's a governing AI. It's on the CodeX website, and it's on the AI journal. The second thing we need is an auditing ecosystem. The problem with, again, if you look at Europe, what you want to do is protect consumers data and citizens' data, and reasonably so. But thank you, Megan, for posting the paper. You want to protect those people, but you can't do it at infinite cost. And the cost right now is you're just wiping out companies. You're destroying livelihoods, and that in itself is eventually the systems collapse. Like you can't have a social support system that doesn't have an economic engine that's gonna power, keep the lights on. And that's a huge danger. Like Norway is great. They have great social benefits. They also have huge amounts of oil. So, and that fund powers a lot of these things. So again, if you want innovation to fund and keep the lights on, you've got to balance out the cost of these regulations. Like UK has done, frankly, a better job than a lot of us at both the AI sandboxing and in thinking about what's the innovation, what are we trying to achieve, and what's the cost? What is the cost we're imposing on people, and is that prejudicial in some ways? So you need to regulate, but you need to do it efficiently. So even a startup can afford to do this. In this case, that means your auditing ecosystem, one, should have lawyers. People don't like us. They have something called ethical AI that lawyers aren't necessarily invited to. And it's because, like zombies, we tend to kill a lot of innovations that we touch and say no and crush things and crush people's spirits, alas. So we have to be creative, but these things, you've got to have lawyers on them. We're trained to do these types of things. Like an engineer is trained to build a bridge, a mechanical engineer, or a generator, or an airplane. Like there's a lot of technical training involved that people outside this group don't necessarily have, but we've got to apply it. So the auditing ecosystem needs to use AI, but it has to have third parties do it. There was a meeting last week at the White House with OpenAI and Google and their leaders and others. I think IBM was there. And they are recommending that a company called Scale AI, great company, like really innovative, super dominant, like they're doing great as far as I know. Scale AI released a product that's going to help people audit, AI risk, and it's an open source code. It's audit. Here's the issue with that code. Scale AI makes money by selling data annotation to make AI better. So they are the last people in the world that have an unbiased ability to comment and do these types of things. So it's an enormous danger if that's kind of the way we're going. But you need a fast, efficient legal AI and way to cross-test system using both human experts, lawyers and non-technical experts, but also AI systems that can cross-check things and audit. You need the humans to suss out things that might go wrong in human ways. You need the AI to work with the scale and to look for other issues. And then third, we need governance AI. The government itself should have AI systems and risk analysis tools that are out there in the ether, checking to make sure there's no weird discontinuous risks and threats to humanity out there. And they, where the private sector and the auditing sector have failed, they need to be able to come in and enforce and protect people. Like, and we don't know what the risks are, right? We have an AI event horizon. We're dealing with something we've never encountered before, a kind of a novel intelligence in the next 10 years or so. We don't know what the risks are yet. And so you need to have governance that's out there, that's looking, that's humble, and that's not just kind of mandating, don't do X, Y, or Z, because that's going to fail and it's going to be too expensive and it's going to be, it'll wipe out the innovation that is actually going to be the most efficient way to solve the problem. That auditing ecosystem, it has to be promulgated. Examples of this are the way that people regulate financial experts, say in New York, FINRA and I'm not sure that FINRA is the right one, but the people that they're licensing agencies that go in and or electrical codes, right? You might have a Senate or a state law that says you've got to have certain safety things, and then there's the implementing code is really extensive, and it's run in part by technical experts. All of these things have problems with them, but we have to regulate. We've got to use legal AI, and we've got to use expert humans, including lawyers, to help navigate this, because I think right now it's kind of a mess. Anyway, I know I've already used a lot of my time. I'd love to open it up to questions and comments and follow-ups with whatever time we have. Back to you, Roland.
Great, thank you, Josh. Yeah, very, very important and thought-provoking discussion, and I think you looked at those topics specifically in the context of the Brazilian government's plans, trying to get their arms around the issues. And so I'm curious if you could share some of your learnings from that process.
Absolutely. And it was a professor at USP, which is the University of Sao Paulo, that asked me to help him with two things. One, the University of Sao Paulo, the state in the city, and this is all public information, of course. Sao Paulo, the city, has its own AI regulator. And Sao Paulo, sorry, maybe the state of Sao Paulo regulates, I think it's 32 million people. The city itself is about 20 million, so it's smaller than Mexico City, but it's like a nation state itself, right? And one of the problems with the Sao Paulo city regulation is that it says all AI should be unbiased. And as you and I know, it's an impossible task. If they're trying to create AI that's unbiased, they'll never have AI. And that means that the commercial people that are like automating the complaint filing and doing all kinds of other things we know is possible right now, they're gonna have this massive asymmetric advantage over judges and over the city. And that's a disaster. So like, how do you modulate that to deal with it? The Senate bills, and there's a bunch of them now, they are essentially taking, much like, so with GDPR was essentially enacted in Brazilian law, not directly, and they changed it, but they took the European model and they applied it. And there's a vast ecosystem of legal tech companies that deal with GDPR compliance, as there is, of course, in the EU and in the US, and within this group. The issue, and then one of the main heuristics in the bill, in the Senate bill that I looked at, is they're defining certain types of functions that are dangerous. Transportation, healthcare, social security, like things that could really harm people. The problem with that is that you can make an argument that almost anything that AI is doing is going to enter into a high risk area, and which has additional compliance, requirements. And what that means is it may wipe out, local activity with AI, except for big American companies that come in and I guess that's okay. But if I were Brazil, I'd want to leverage my own computer science ecosystem. They have an enormous ecosystem. People love, by the way, Stanford. They love CodeX. Great job, Megan and Roland, and happy to introduce more people into that. But as you know, there's an enormous interest in a lot of things in the US. But if I was Brazil, I want my own people doing this. Like, I want my own leaders of Brazil. And when I was in Sao Paulo a couple of weeks ago, I said, there was so when the Wright brothers were around, right around that time, there was a guy named Santo Dumont based in Rio, and he was also building airplanes. And there's an argument that he was really the first pioneer to do this successfully, to get powered flight correct. And I said to them, don't you want, you want the next Santo Dumont to be the next Wright brothers, right? You don't want great innovation to happen and then die or get built just in Silicon Valley. You want it to be done in Brazil too. And again, there are dozens of multi-billion-dollar, Brazilian co-founded or founded companies. Meta just one of them, where there's an enormous amount of value, and some of that goes into Silicon Valley. Some of that should obviously be in Brazil as well. but the regulatory environment has to encourage it to some extent. Did I address your question at all, Roland? Or
Yeah, so
I
are they
dealt with the
using,
universal
so
stuff.
yeah, so it
Go ahead.
sounds like, I mean, a lot of those regulations are following, at least, from what I gather, and I only have a superficial understanding, sort of like this approach of like organizing the risks into sort of like certain things that are absolutely not desirable. Like in Europe, it's sort of like a social scoring AI and that sort of stuff. They would, that would be illegal out of the gate, and then other things that are sort of high risk areas where you need to do an analysis, and other things that are of less concern. And that seems to be a little bit, at least what the Europeans are trying to do. But anyways, yeah. So I wanted to see if other folks had any questions too.
And just on that, would love to hear other questions. Just on that, my worry is, so chemotherapy kills people. Like it's actually quite dangerous. You're putting poison in your body, but you're doing it because you're dying of leukemia or for some reason like that. So I just want to be sure that when we think about policy, we're thinking about not, hey, we're the regulator coming to save the day. What's the net human benefit? What's the net human utility for these things? And is it not unduly harming one group or other? So you're absolutely right. And there's a ton of wise things that Europe is doing and has done that I appreciate, right? As a consumer, where we don't have necessarily some of the benefits of those things. I just want to be sure that human utility is at the center of it and not something else. And the benefit of legal AI is if we use this, corporate, civil, auditing ecosystem in the government itself, it actually can improve productivity of the law itself. So that's something, it's not a political decision, it's something we can help technically, that is just it seems like a no-brainer that we could help with. Sorry to interrupt.
Okay. No, all good. So, okay, folks, anyone else, please unmute yourself so we can hear you, or use the chat function. And yeah, don't be shy. Or else I'll start calling on you. You can see. All right, so what's next? What's next, Josh, then, after the paper?
So, I think there is. It's really, in some ways, it's fire and forget. It's up to the Brazilian citizens to decide, and through the Senate and other mechanisms, what they're going to do. But I think that governance AI piece can and should exist regardless. I think it's universal. I think it's intensely relevant to the US, which hasn't enacted anything major yet. We'll see what happens. And we do have a lot of great private sector innovation. But I think the charge right now is in the US and other jurisdictions is to build things that actually do this stuff that are developing. You don't want to be like a kind of a sad or mournful Eeyore that just complains about, this is bad and it's terrible. You want to create things. So I think it's incumbent upon us to create governance AI that actually works, maybe in a sandbox. I think that's on us, and I think we should do it now. AI regulations is kind of a mess. It's kind of, we have not done a great job thinking through how best to regulate these kind of things that are beyond the event horizon. But I think if we build systems that actually work, that's a much better way of addressing these things than just complaining about it, whether it's like underregulated or overregulated.
Yeah. So our fellow John May, I think he's proposing as a sort of a framework for AI to exist and for AI alignment to use our legal system, and building a AI that sort of can process and understand the law. And so anyways, I think that's a huge opportunity area for legal informatics scholars as well as entrepreneurs to help us figure out how we can do that at scale. But yeah, we should bring in John again sometime. I think because it's a really such an important topic, and he's doing some very interesting work. And then others are thinking about how to transform human readable laws into computable laws, and how to do that at scale using large language models, because thus far one of the main obstacles has been just this is a very human labor intensive work to capture the logic of statutes and laws in a form that a computer can reason with. It's very human labor intensive thus far, but one of the promises that large language models hold is that they can help in this translation effort, but we still need to figure out how to ensure that in this translation, the version that's being created, the computable version, is faithful to the original version, human text version. So, anyways,
I think that's absolutely right, and there's different ways of doing it to go native. I think that the role of CodeX might have been to set the debate, to help people think about standards for how to evaluate things. Right, that's something you can do, Roland, you and team at great scale, and then the debate and workshops on this, like how like to actually think about doing it, and whether it's a pop-up or just conversations that people are having. I think CodeX can play a really unique role in asking these questions and challenging everything. I think we should challenge everything. I think we should challenge the EU. I think we should challenge the US. I think we should challenge private sector, because I don't think we're close to a good way of regulating these things yet. And I think helping to set the debate and asking hard questions of everybody, including us, is a great thing that you can do, better than anyone in the world.
Yeah. So that's right. So okay, just quickly, because we're over time, there's 3 questions that came in, and maybe you can sort of like answer them all at once if I can. So anyway, so Brad's saying he's uncomfortable calling GPT AI. ML is not intelligent, in my view, echoing many smart others. Do you have any thoughts on that? It's the first question. Then Cherry's asking more about Anthropic's Claude, which was trained on constitutional law, if you can share any thoughts on that. And then Dushko is asking, what's your feeling about sort of your opinion on the EU AI Act? Is it a good first step towards regulating AI? And it's just as Brad just sent a sort of an addendum to his point about GPT, saying that sometimes it's impressive but also confusing. Maybe there's something more going on with methods that aren't published or apparent to me. So if you could just like kind of wrap up the conversation, trying to address those questions, that would be
very quickly. Great. Yeah, I'll take the last one first. I compare ChatGPT for law as kind of like a 1L. For those of you that went to law school, and there's amazing contributors that never did, like when you're a 1L, like you're like, everything. And when someone asks you for legal advice, gosh darn it, you gave that legal advice. Like we were idiots. Like we would make, like, you just, because you think you know everything and you really don't, right? You've been through the bare minimum. There is so PwC announced they're putting $1 billion into investing in enterprise generative AI. We have to do that in the law. And is it going to be PwC who's doing it, or is it going to be a big law firm, or is it going to be someone in this virtual room, right? So to get to something that's useful to clients requires another big step. It has to be reliable, and you have to be able to say why it works, right? Which may mean interpretable AI, not just a black box. Second, the EU AI Act. Here's what I would say, and I think they should look at the UK, what they're doing with the sandbox. The key thing, I think, for all of us when we're encountering a new phenomenon, whether it's just math and statistics, or whether it's the singularity, whatever you think, we should be less arrogant. we don't know what the best way to regulate these things are, and we should manage, and we shouldn't assume that we're not going to cause harms even when we're trying to fix a problem. Like, you don't want a plumber who fixes the plumbing problem and sets fire to your house, and that's the risk of any regulator. They have to manage the upside. They have to think, what's the benefit of this stuff, and does it justify some level of moderate risk that's not going to unduly harm people? Again, is it, chemotherapy drugs that are going to save lives? Because you can end up killing people by over-regulating as well as under-regulating, and you've got to manage all of those risks in a kind of think of it as a probability sphere. Constitutional AI, this just came out. Their paper just came out. I haven't read all of it. I read a lot of it. Basically, what Anthropic is doing, and I love the fact that people are being so thoughtful about these things and red teaming and using AI, as I mentioned. They cannot solve this problem themselves. The AI companies cannot internally solve the problem of creating AI that's totally compliant, or that's really going to get all the things they do need to be done. First of all, there's a mathematical reason. So there's you call it the incompleteness theorem. There's an idea that a system cannot prove itself, and there's mathematical reasons for that I'm not competent to elucidate on this call. Second, no one believes you if you do. You need a third party to come in and give you, like, we tested this, we looked at it, and they legitimately went through it. It wasn't a fake audit like we saw with SVB. Like, it was like a real heavy duty audit. Sorry, but they gave SVB a clean bill of health like 2 days before it exploded into and potentially hurt a lot of people. So you have to have an outside party doing this. You can't do it only yourself, and that outside party is going to think about things that you've never thought of. That's the whole benefit of it. Three, on Brad's question, about 100 years ago, we did it was the CNN, it was the civics papers that were out that, and I think I wrote in the paper we wrote for the gang at that point, artificial intelligence is neither. It's neither artificial nor intelligent. And it's a little cheesy, but there's a lot of truth to saying artificial intelligence is just math plus data. That's all it is. And ChatGPT, as Wolfram has said, is just predicting letters. Like that is what it is doing. It's a letter prediction machine. It doesn't understand what it's saying. So even though, and especially if it looks like it does, the benefit of this, of demystifying it, is that people worship it less and people get less freaked out about it. And so I think that's a great point. And lastly, just want to say again, if you're interested in human rights and helping people, it's life and death issue where you can really help a lot of folks all over the world. Please contact me later, and happy to take questions after. It's Joshua Walker on LinkedIn, j@system.legal. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, thanks, Josh. Thank you. And maybe you'd put it in the text box too, so people can see it. And yeah, I think the last two comments are also worth mentioning. So Peter saying he wishes we would pay a little bit more attention to integrating advanced parsing techniques with symbolic AI rather than going all in for statistically grounded approaches. This will be music to the ears of our research director, Professor Geneseret, of course, who is very much a symbolic AI person. And we see going forward, and I think that's, in the world of explainable AI, this is a huge opportunity area, I think, for symbolic AI, deterministic AI. And Brad's saying that Amelie at Future Law was saying that even 1% going wrong was too much. And Emily's working on immigration law issues, of course, which are, high risk and high stake kind of area. It's a high stake area too. And so anyway, so I think, yeah, thanks for making those points, Peter and Brad. And thank you all for joining today and for all the great questions. And thank you, of course, Josh, for giving a great talk. And we'll wrap it up here. And yeah, so thanks again. Check out the hackathon on May 20th. And Megan, do you have anything on schedule for our next session yet, or?
Yes, we have 2 speakers next week.
Okay, so we'll send out something early next week, and look forward to seeing you again next week at the latest. All right, thank you all. Bye-bye.
Thanks, folks.